Welcome to the 12th Annual Reverend Bernie Clark Lecture, this year entitled Justice at the Border, the Dignity of Human Life at the Core of Our Faith. I am Bill Purcell, the Acting Executive Director of the Center for Social Concerns and the Co-Director of the Catholic Social Tradition Minor at the University of Notre Dame. This lecture highlights the Center for Social Concerns Catholic Social Tradition theme this year, which is Justice in the World, highlighting the 50th anniversary of the document by the same name of the World Synod of Bishops in 1971. The Father Bernie Clark Lecture is one way the Center for Social Concerns strives to inspire students to live out the promotion of justice. This lecture is being taped and will be on the Center's website for those who missed tonight's event. You can also go to the Center's website to learn about ways to put your faith into action and how to further work for justice in the world following tonight's lecture. Let me say a few words about Father Bernie Clark, whom this annual lecture is named for. Father Bernie was a humble Holy Cross priest who died at the young age of 56. Father Bernie was a native of Montgomery, Alabama, and did graduate work in medieval history at Cal Berkeley and Notre Dame. He served in pastoral positions in parishes and in numerous campus ministry roles. He shared life's lessons with his students often about the theory of enough. Step 1 was pray to know what is enough. Step 2 was you're not allowed to change the conclusions of step 1. And step 3 was, once you've reached that level, stop working for money and give away what you don't need. Father Bernie was truly a wise man. If you have questions for Sister Norma, please enter those in the Google form on the live stream page, and she'll respond to those during the question and answer session following the lecture. Finally, let me introduce our honored guest, Sister Norma Pimentel. Norma Pimentel is a sister with the Missionaries of Jesus and a licensed professional counselor. As Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, she oversees the charitable arm of the Diocese of Brownsville, providing oversight of the different ministries and programs in the areas of emergency assistance, housing assistance, counseling, and pregnancy care to all 4 counties in the Rio Grande Valley. Sister Norma chairs the local emergency food and shelter program that distributes federal funds to local agencies, providing assistance to the area's poor. She also leads efforts in the community that responds to emergency needs and provides relief in times of disaster and crisis. She was instrumental in organizing community resources to respond to the surge of Central Americans seeking asylum in the United States and setting up humanitarian respite centers in McAllen and Brownsville, Texas in June 2014. Those efforts brought Sister Norma recognition as a recipient of the 2015 Martin Luther King Jr. Keep the Dream Alive Award from Catholic Charities USA, and a nomination for Texan of the Year. And in March 2015, she spoke at the United Nations headquarters in New York City at the invitation of the Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations. During the U.S. papal visit, Sister Norma met with Pope Francis in New York City and presented him with one of her original paintings which depicted an immigrant mother and child. She was first introduced to Pope Francis in August 2015 via a town hall that was arranged by ABC News, which later aired in a 1-hour special edition of 2020. In December 2015, our Sunday Visitor named Sister Norma as one of 8 Catholics of the Year, men and women, religious and lay, who made an indelible mark in 2015. Before overseeing Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, Sister Pimentel was one of the leaders who directed Casa Oscar Romero, a refugee shelter in San Benito and later Brownsville for Central Americans fleeing their war-torn countries in the 1980s. The shelter provided emergency relief and temporary housing for hundreds of thousands of refugees. Sister Norma received her bachelor's degree in fine arts from Pan American University in Edinburgh, Texas, a master's degree in theology from St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas, a master's degree in pastoral counseling from Loyola University in Chicago, and she has an honorary PhD in humane letters from Holy Family University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was also recently selected as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people of 2020. Let us give this Laetare Medal winner also a warm Notre Dame welcome to Sister Norma Pimentel. Sister, it's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. I was really looking forward to be back in Notre Dame. Unfortunately, this is not possible at this time. But I am hopeful that as soon as this passes, I will be able to visit your beautiful campus once again. As most of you may know, I live in the southern border of Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. I am an immigrant. I crossed the border into the United States in my mother's womb. I always say that I am a US citizen by chiripa. That means by chance, because my dad, as a young father, like many other parents that come to the United States in search of an opportunity to provide a dignified life for his family, one day he decides to cross over to the United States and ask, what does he need to do in order for his family to be able to live here? He filled out an application and then was told to remain in the United States, something he was not expecting. And he needed to do that until he received a response regarding his petition. A few days later, I was born. So my dad's American dream has brought me to this point in my life. This is why I'm here. I grew up growing back and forth between two countries, the United States and Mexico. I'm a US citizen and I'm also a Mexican citizen. For me, it has been a blessing to have the richness of two cultures defining who I am. When I graduated with the Bachelor's of Fine Arts, I was excited about my future and what I could accomplish. God had other plans for me. One evening, I called a friend of mine to see what she was planning to do if she was going out. My intent was to join her, and she says, we're going to a prayer group. And I said, what are you doing after the prayer group? And she says, we're going to Pizza Hut. So I said, perfect, come pick me up after the prayer group. But she says, you know, in order to go to the Pizza Hut, you have to come to the prayer group. So it is truly interesting how somehow God fine-tunes our life, you know, because I think he knew how much I love pizza. And attending this prayer group changed everything for me. I was at the point in my life that I discovered God. My life changed 180 degrees, and here I am. Living along the border, I have always been face to face with immigration reality. At the convent, the sisters, the Missionaries of Jesus, always received refugee mothers and their infants. They were always part of our community life. During this time, back in the 80s, the number of immigrant families started to increase, and my religious community was asked by our bishop to oversee a refugee shelter. This was around the time that Bishop Oscar Romero was assassinated in El Salvador. During those years, we saw tens of thousands of refugees coming into the United States. In this shelter, Casa Oscar Romero, named after now Saint Oscar Romero. It was an oasis in the journey of the many refugees that we provided them with immediate humanitarian care, a place where they could rest and then continue their journey with the hope that to get through and finally arrive where their families were in the United States. These families had not been stopped by Border Patrol. It was during these years that I came to be completely dedicated to helping families that were arriving at the border. And somehow managed, through all the difficulties of crossing the river and getting across, to get to where our shelter was. Many were still wet and muddy from just crossing the river. I remember a story, somebody said that in order to get to our house, they had to cross through 2 rivers because they didn't realize that in the dark, the Rio Grande kind of trolls around like a snake. And so they crossed once, and they crossed one time a river, and then they crossed another river, and they ended up back in Mexico. And so later on figured out that they were still in Mexico, so they had to cross back into the United States. And so those are the nice stories that made us laugh, as we received all these families, thousands of them. But they also share the horrific stories of torture and killings, all caused by this turmoil in their war-torn countries, in El Salvador and Nicaragua. I remember one night when I was sitting outside at the end of the day, as I usually would, a young man sat by my side. He began to share his story with me. He showed me his hands, and he didn't have a single nail in any of the 2 hands, the fingernails. They had been removed from torturing. Like that story, we heard so many stories, horrific stories. We learned of all the atrocities that we as a nation were contributing with our own tax dollars. At that time, the US was sending $1 million a day to Central America to support this kind of war actions. This was when I began to better understand the injustices that our nation was part of. Years later, now in 2014, we started to witness a massive migration of families again, this time mostly children. They were coming to the United States. These families were fleeing the realities in their countries that they were experiencing after years of living under corrupt governments. It was also a time when gangs and cartels came into power, causing communities to fear for their lives, especially the lives of their young, innocent children. At this point, our country was not prepared to handle the great number, especially of children, who were entering our country. This new reality was so different for the Border Patrol, who were mostly having to deal before with drugs and traffickers. And now they were having to deal with families, mostly children, seeking safety. They were not criminals. In many cases, these children were traveling without their parents. This made it very difficult for the Border Patrol because they had to keep all the children there in detention for weeks, if not months, in very poor conditions, with not any way of allowing them to take a shower because they didn't have those facilities. These parents would send them, because they didn't have the means to travel with their children, they would send them with somebody else. I have been asked sometimes, how can a parent send their child by themselves to the unknown? When I was asked this question by a reporter, I responded, are you a mother? And she said, yes. Wouldn't you do anything to save your child? And she said, yes. And then tears came to her eyes. It is not until we put ourselves in their shoes that we can understand what a parent must go through to save their child. For much of that decade, Central American families, unaccompanied children entering the United States would first be detained by the US Border Patrol, then transferred to the Department of Homeland Security. Once they had been completed and pre-screened process, they were released and reunited with families awaiting court actions for their immigration status. Families found themselves in our streets in McAllen, Texas, at the bus station, without any necessities, any general supplies or assistance, with no means of how to travel beyond that point. Most of them, all of them practically were dirty and muddy and hungry and fearful and totally struggling. And the humanitarian response quickly became a collaborative cooperation here at the border. That involved many key partners like the city government, the clinics, restaurants, communities, local residents. Even the Border Patrol became part of our response, with volunteers coming from all over the United States. All became part of these relief efforts. At the Humanitarian Respite Center, began to alleviate human suffering. For several years, since 2014, the Humanitarian Respite Center has helped approximately 200,000 immigrants, refugees. And in 2019, that was the peak where we were receiving up to 1,000 or maybe 1,200 refugees every single day. The second half of 2019, that brought a big change to the center's mission. The humanitarian center evolved into a new immigration because of the new immigration policy that we were experiencing. And these policies were being put in place to deter and discourage immigration into the United States. We first saw these policies by the first signs of detained families in detention facilities. And the families will remain there in those detention centers for quite a while, you know. And then we start to see how the families were separated from their children, and they were taken away from their parents. Little ones as young as a few months, with no sense of how this family could ever at any point come to be reunited. Then finally, we had the policy we call now the Migrant Protection Protocol, MPP, also known as Remain in Mexico policy, which greatly reduced the number of Central American families that actually came to the respite center. Under this policy, the immigrant refugee families claiming asylum in the United States were sent back to Mexico to wait. They had to wait and start their asylum process and come to their asylum hearings in a very delayed, lengthy process. They have been there for over a year. These families that now are allowed in the United States were very few. Most of them are only those that were under certain vulnerable populations like pregnant women. We're still allowed to enter the United States, and we continue to welcome at our center, at the Humanitarian Respite Center. But across the border in Mexico, the refugees are stuck in a makeshift tent camp in deplorable conditions. I'm fortunate that I can go there almost every other day, sometimes more, to try to help. This is the largest refugee camp along the US-Mexico border. It's almost a tent city in Matamoros. It's right across. When you cross the international bridge, you see the families in these tents along the river. These families there suffer from inadequate water, insufficient food, terrible heat, as well as illnesses from all these rats and mosquitoes and snakes that are brought in by the river flooding, the storms that we get so constantly because we're right at the Gulf. Their little tents, after so much sun, are so easily torn open with the big storms and all the water that collapses those tents, and just water just gets everywhere. You know, atop from these difficulties, the families also have to deal with Mexico's criminal organizations. They're known as La Maña. These are certain gangs and cartels that work with a heartless attitude toward these families, do a lot of extortions and kidnappings, sexual assaults, and seek to control the entire camp. Families live in fear that something can happen to them or to their child. Many people have been killed. They appear drowned, and lately we've seen one body after another just appear drowned at the river, something that was not happening before. And we see it now. After more than a year, these circumstances, the refugee families find themselves reaching a breaking point. I hear how the families are so desperate that they just decide to cross and risk. They can't wait any longer. Send their children, hoping that they can make it, and they're allowed to go with their mother or their father or their aunt or their sister in the United States. They are in great danger, and they're still in need of great humanitarian assistance. In response, many of us in the border are assisting these families with food and water and tents, medical attention. There is a group of doctors locally from our hospital here that take care of premature babies. They're asking, can we join you? And tomorrow I'm going to actually take them so that I can go visit and see and help these moms that are pregnant, that are about to deliver babies, or maybe moms that just delivered a newborn and they can be able to help them. Our goal has been to do everything possible to help these families survive MPP policy, which is keeping them in this limbo under heartbreaking conditions. The mission of our work at the camp continues to be the same as when we first started the Humanitarian Respite Center. Provide immediate humanitarian care and restore human dignity. I have seen the reality of innocent lives suffering on the border up close. I have seen human suffering of innocent victims of crime forced to remain in Mexico because of the devastating impact that anti-immigrant policies have on families striving for dignity. I find that a policy that destroys life can never be justified. Those policies that hurt humanity need to be replaced with policies that respect life. I believe that it is unfortunate that many life issues are politicized, that all laws or policies that involve human life must not be used as a bargaining chip for a political gain. We must protect humanity from all these political schemes. It is disheartening to me to see so many people suffering. There are people who are hurting, and those who can make a difference to change it are not taking action to do so. I think it is unfortunate that life issues, like what immigrants at the border and throughout the country are having to endure, have become so politicized. The political partisanship has taken away from the work of actually addressing the humanitarian crisis that we are seeing before us. It is disheartening to see human life, human suffering, become part of a political conflict, where no one is truly looking for solutions. You know, Pope Francis' message for us on World Day of Migrants and Refugees this past September 27, he tells us we are called to respond to this pastoral challenge with 4 verbs he had indicated in his message in the past. To welcome. We must be open to receive, especially in our hearts, those who are displaced and suffering and are before us needing our help. We must be able to protect those who are voiceless, fragile, and vulnerable, those who cannot take care of themselves. We must be willing to speak up, help them have a voice, and be safe. We must be able to promote. For for those who are marginalized by society, so they can be seen, so they can be recognized as people with the dignity that all life deserves. We must be able to integrate. We find ways to bring into our communities those who are rejected, or maybe they are in our peripheries of our own life, our own communities, allowing them to belong. These words, he added 6 additional verbs that deal with the very practical actions, and that is that we must be able to know and to understand. They must not be strangers. We must be open to hear their stories, know their names, understand their struggles. We must be able to be close in order to serve them. We cannot help if we don't allow ourselves to get close enough to listen to them. We can only make sense of what we don't understand and what we might fear if we allow ourselves to listen, so that we can make peace with ourselves and that which keeps us distant. In order to grow, he tells us, it is necessary for us to share ourselves. It is when we give ourselves that we will allow for us to reach higher potentials. For this, we must share ourselves and be open and be willing to not hold back. We also must be involved in order to promote. We can only help others be in a better place if we roll up our sleeves and get to work. I guess be okay going to bed tired, doing good. We must be able to cooperate in order to build. By coming together, we can actually accomplish a lot of good. Collectively, we can make a difference. It takes all of us to build a better tomorrow for everyone. These are the verbs that our Holy Father speaks about us doing. What I see today is a very polarized faith community. I see how politicians use our values, our faith, to make us believe that the things that they want us to believe. And all the things that benefit them. The new way of talking about truth as fake news only brings confusion and doubt that contributes to so much division and mistrust. And we as Catholics are finding ourselves thinking, we must take sides. I can't see how we as a Catholic can take sides. Neither side truly holds the totality of our Catholic social teachings, of which the respect to human dignity is of most essential. It is for this reason that we must inform our conscience. I believe it is our responsibility as Catholics to challenge any side that does not respect all life in every situation. Any political agenda that excludes, rejects, hurts, eliminates, destroys, and kills life must be challenged. Any action that does not respect the sanctity of life can never be justified. Life is sacred. It must be defended, protected, promoted at all times, from the moment of conception to natural death. No one has the right to destroy life. We can never justify any action of violence against another human life. It is not enough to say, you are pro-life, our actions will speak the truth of who we are. As Catholics, we must know that we can find the truth only in God. That God is our compass. He is our true north, our highway to heaven. And as Carlo Acutis said that's how we find the Eucharist. When we find God in the inner core of who we are. Our mission as Catholics is to find the purpose of our existence only in God. From that moment we open our eyes in the morning, and hopefully it's not the first thing that we do is reach out to our phones, but rather to say, gracias Dios por hoy. Thank you, God, for today. What is your plan for me for today? So at the core of our faith, the essence of who we are and who God is for us. I think that we will all agree that it sums up into one word, and that word is love, because God is love. And because of that, we must be able to allow love to be our compass, to give us directions, to help us rediscover how to be one human family. And we also need to rediscover how to build relationships, because of all the distancing that we have encountered. We need to learn how to come together as one. Pope Francis invites us to be a community of belonging, to be able to reach out to those who are in our peripheries and welcome them, invite them to be part of who we are, to care about them. I believe that this is what pro-life means. Working together to be in one human family, where racism and justice are also part of being pro-life. This is what Pope Francis has invited us, for all of us to belong. I find it very helpful that we promote the goodness in each other, that by the way we behave, by being good, we invite others and inspire others to also be the same. It's a way that brings us together, toward finding certain solutions that respect diversity and that allows us to promote unity. I also believe that we can radicalize kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and the simple actions of gestures that show that we care about the other. We must be able to recognize those that are displaced, that are alienated, that are cast aside, and bring them into our lives, to show that the most important thing is to care and to restore the dignity of those that are hurting. I think that we must be willing to break away from all the prejudice and all the fear that pulls us back, that paralyzes us and does not let us be this person that we're called to be. So connecting with all that is good in us is how we can show how to create a better world for everyone. I can assure you that if you do this, you will be happy. I can guarantee that. I find that it's because we will find God in our life. And we will leave God in how we live our lives. I wish that we don't miss out on doing this. It is only God that must mark our path into who we are and how we will be. I think it's important that we check with Him every day, from the moment we open our eyes. I do that. I would say, I need you here with me. It's so important to have God right here so He can guide us and tells us what He wants us to do. Then we must be a community that respects life, a community that promotes justice for all, and that gives us the dignity for all human life. This is how we can bring hope, especially in these times of darkness and challenging times for us. We must trust God in everything. I'm certain that He's counting on that. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Sister Norma, for your words, your witness, and your wisdom. And this evening, you're sharing with many different students and people from around the country. In fact, we have alumni and different folks who are sending questions in. So if you have a moment, could we ask you a few questions?
Please do.
Sure. First question, this is from Matthew Whelan at Baylor University, who asked, the introduction mentioned your work with Casa Romero. Could you speak more about Romero's witness and how you think it inspires the work of welcoming the stranger?
Yes. Well, you know, Romero was a bishop, a person that when he was in El Salvador, he encountered his people suffering, and he saw that with his own eyes. And there was a tremendous impact that it did in his life, in transforming him and making him realize that when you're before that reality, that you know what you need to do. He immediately saw that he needed to be that voice for his people suffering. So his example, his words, his understanding of what he lived and how he received God to allow him to be able to express himself and be that presence and that hope for the people that were hurting and suffering. He shows us that we must not be afraid to stand up and defend those that we see need us to speak up for them. And so I encourage you to read a lot of his writings, because he clearly brings forward that message of God that he lived personally himself, and are very encouraging words for us as well. So please read the things that he left us to read and to understand what was happening to him and how we must respond the way he did as well, which took him to lose his life because of that. But when you know what you need to do, you will do because you know it's the right thing to do. And he knew that. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Sister Norma. Again, being light in the darkness as you are for many of us at this time. There's another question. This is from Anna from Notre Dame. She wants to know, how has this current pandemic affected the situation at the border? in the encampments and the humanitarian efforts to aid migrant families at this time?
And, the pandemic has been difficult for all of us, especially for our communities in both sides of the border. Fortunately, the people at the camp, the refugees, live in these areas, this space, very poor conditions, dirt and, their cleanliness is almost non-existent, For some reason, they seem to be immune from the coronavirus. It appears that way because you don't see anybody sick, And so it's a blessing, But the way it has affected them has that the United States has blocked any entry into United States. So now it just leaves them there waiting, for so long. All this year they've been waiting because there's no entry into United States, and they have to just wait for that asylum process, and that's so discouraging, and it's because of the pandemic. And the same thing happened with the Mexican government, that where they're at. They closed the camp, put a fence, and so it was put for the purpose of keeping people from entering the camp that could have the virus. But then it became more of a security measure and not allowing anyone that was just arriving to be able to enter the camp, to be in a space where they could have a tent and water and the things that we were providing. They refused entry of anyone new to the camp. And mostly it was because of the pandemic, but then it became as a security measure, and they just completely made it more difficult for the families. And so this is how the pandemic has hurt the families at the refugee camp.
Thank you. Another question. This is from James at Notre Dame. Sister Norma, I know from your social media posts that you spend a lot of time with the people in the camp at Matamoros. Would you just tell us some of the stories of what people are doing there from day to day?
Yes, it's beautiful for me to be able to spend time with the families. I look forward because the time I'm with them, they are waiting, and in the meantime they're taking care of each other and sharing meals together, and the children do get an opportunity to have some kind of school activities that some of the parents themselves teach the kids, and are led by groups from the United States that are sending them notebooks and paper and things that they need. And we just opened a little school space. It's a tent with chairs and tables for the children. And it's so beautiful to see that, in spite of the fact that they're struggling and they're discouraged and they're suffering so much, you see a child trying to do their homework that they get from the teacher in their little camp, in the little tent that they have. And this is some of the things that they do, and trying to resolve the issues that they face on a day-to-day basis. Like most recently, one of the little tents burned down. And so the Mexican authorities decided that all the electrical plugs that were connected wrong are just being cut, and now they're all suffering because we don't have electricity. We were being able to have a fan for the little baby, and so they're going to be that voice for the authorities in Mexico. Say, listen, this mom needs a fan because this baby was just born. And so those are the kind of things that on a day-to-day basis we're trying to figure out, and maybe they don't have enough water, or maybe now there's too many mosquitoes. What can we do with that? And so figuring out those things, but they live a life on an ongoing basis that is also sharing, maybe crying or maybe laughing or sharing a meal. And that's the beautiful part of being community there. From all the different countries, they come together and be one community, and that's beautiful too.
Thank you. Again, thank you for that beautiful story. Have another question from Joan from Notre Dame. Does the politicization of immigration make you angry? If so, how do you respond to that anger?
More than making me angry, it makes me sad. It's unfortunate that this happens because it's frustrating. It's a frustration of not being able to see results of situations that we see are important in life, like the human suffering of these families, these people that are not a threat to the United States, they're looking for asylum, and yet we keep them in that situation, and we're not addressing it because it becomes part of this political scheme, you know, and that's frustrating. That when are we going to get rid of that? When are we as a country are addressing their issues correctly? And it's frustrating that doesn't happen. You know, I wish that we hold our elected officials or elected leaders accountable for representing us and the things that they must do. You know?
Thank you. Here's a question from Sharon at St. Mary's. Do you often talk with people who are opposed to welcoming immigrants across the border into the U.S.? What do you tell them?
I don't normally talk to people who are opposed to it, but let me give you a story that happened to me. Back in the 80s, when we had Casa Oscar Romero, we actually needed a Xerox machine, and I called this lady to come and sell me this machine because we were doing asylum papers and we needed copies. And she comes in, and the first thing she tells me is, sister, I'm just going to let you know that I'm 100% against helping these illegal aliens. You know? And I said, thank you for telling me. Let me show you what I do and why. And I walked her through and introduced her to the moms and the children and explained to them what was happening and why they were there. And when we got back to the office, she turns around and tells me, sister, I am 100% in favor of what you're doing. I think people that are against is because they haven't seen. And they build this wall that pushes everybody else outside of them. So my approach is help them see, help them understand what it is that I do and why. You know, I think that will change the minds and the hearts of so many.
Thank you again. Thank you for your witness and your actions. This is a question from Trent from Notre Dame, who asks, it's a little bit further on that point, is what are specific actions that we can take to change the anti-immigrant sentiment that is permeated throughout the United States of America?
I think we must speak up. We must help people understand what's happening, because if we bring that reality to them so they can see it, they can understand it, they will change. You know, we must be that voice that will help people understand and see. You know. And just think of those words, those verbs that our Holy Father talked to us about. And it brings clarity to us to what to do. I think we must help our elected officials change policies that are hurting humanity. You know, I think that's one of our responsibilities. I also think that for the most part, all people are good. Everyone. It's just that we build walls that separate us, and we must be able to help people understand so that they can change those attitudes. You know, I think that that's the way to do it. You know, at least start that way.
Sure. Continually putting our faith into action, as you tell us about that. We have just one final question for you, and as I look at the picture behind you, can you tell us about your background in the fine arts and the painting that you gave to Pope Francis of the Mother and Child?
Oh, yes. Well, you know, since I remember I was in first grade, and my first grade teacher asked me she put butcher paper in the whole wall, and she said to draw the Nativity. So I knew right from the start, since I started to grow up, you know, little as I was, and I had the talent in my hands, gift to draw and paint and do creative things with my hands. And so I've always known that this is something God gifted me with. And so when I've been working with and helping with the refugees, one of the things that has captured me has been able to draw the mom and the children, you know. And so I've done a lot of paintings that depict that mother's suffering. The painting that I gave her Holy Father was an Honduran mother from Honduras with her little boy Tomas, and they had just arrived at our center, and they were in distress. You know, you could see in their eyes that they'd been through so much, and that those eyes reflected a lot of pain and what they had gone through. And so I took a picture And I captured that in a painting I gave to the Holy Father, and the image of mothers carrying their babies in their back, with a sarape wrapped up, and it's a beautiful way how mother takes care of their child, as close as possible to them to keep them safe. And being able to capture that in my painting is something that I love to do.
Again, muchas gracias, Sister Norma. It has been so wonderful to have you join us here at Notre Dame, and we really can't express again our thanks enough. And we're so proud of you, having received the Laetare Medal and now being one of the 100 most important people recognized by Time Magazine. And we definitely want you to come back when things clear up, and our people, we can travel again, and you always have an open door and open arms to join us back here at Notre Dame, to share your beautiful stories, your wonderful witness, the call to justice that we're called to live. And so, again, we love having you, and we're very excited and proud that you gave the annual Father Bernie Clark lecture. Father Bernie was a person who was very humble, as you are, very caring, but again, was a witness in many silent, different ways. And day to day, you go to the border and you're witnessing and reminding us of how we're called to live the gospel, and how, again, if you want peace, we need to work for justice, but how to be light in the darkness, how to have hope in this year of 2020 with many different, dark things happening. So again, muchas gracias on behalf of Our Lady of Notre Dame. Thank you again for the time with your crazy schedule. And I know we had to reschedule it, so we're glad that you're healthy, you're well, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. So I want to say good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night to everyone, and thank you all for joining us throughout Notre Dame and throughout the country. Blessings in this continued year, and please stay healthy and stay safe. Good night.
Thank you. Bye con Dios.